Where are we going to get £2,000 from? It might as well have been £2 million. It seemed impossible. But Pops and his friends were realising impossible was a good place to start. So again Friday, Saturday and Sunday became knee drill, an old Salvation Army expression. By Sunday evening the church believed God had answered, even though only about £200 had come in. But then during the week, Pops received through the post a cheque for £1,000. It was from a church in Birmingham who were holding tent meetings in Victoria Park, Smethwick, which, as every geography student knows, so Pops says, is the centre of the universe. Pops was excited to know there was another church that was just as crazy, happy and full of love as the one he belonged to. During the week the rest of the money needed came in bit by bit, sometimes £1, sometimes £25, sometimes by post or just dropped through the letterbox. Pops and the church were now the proud owners of a 300-seat marquee, and there it was, a great big tangled heap in the middle of the park, huge sheets of different shapes and sizes of canvas, ropes of all types and colours, an assortment of metal stakes, some very long poles, some short square poles. Everything that was needed to build a marquee was there, except the owner's manual. It was 8 o'clock Saturday morning, and at 9 o'clock the leaders from the other churches in Leamington would arrive to help put the marquee up. At 10 o'clock, the tangled heap looked even more tangled. Pops was feeling very embarrassed. He had been lovingly told by mature Christian leaders that maybe he was not experienced enough, or his theology was not as it ought to be, and this just confirmed their suspicions. But they were good men and did their best to help and encourage. By 12 o'clock, there had still been no progress, apart from a few more knots appearing in ropes and one or two bruised shins where poles had decided that gravity was a reality and skyhooks were not. Then Pops had a brainwave. He said to everyone, "I know Jesus was a carpenter and not a tent maker, but I bet if we asked him, he would show us what to do." So everyone bowed their heads. Pops wasn't sure if they were bowing their heads in prayer or in sympathy. Some bright spark said, maybe we could ask St. Paul at the same time because he was a tent maker. There was some laughter, but Pops prayed anyway. "Lord Jesus, we haven't a clue what we're doing. Please help us." Then Nana arrived with bags of chips for the workers, and prayer and chip butties did the trick. Everything became clear, and the big jumble started to look like a beautiful marquee. By 7:30, when the first people were arriving for the meeting, the last few chairs were being arranged and the PA was being tested. Nana and her friends were on the stage and started singing. To Pops's surprise, the marquee was quickly filling up with Christians from all over Leamington, including a lady pushing her son in a wheelchair, who came right down the centre of the meeting and sat on the front row. Pops suddenly felt very hot and sweaty. He wished he hadn't worn a tie. He wished he hadn't bought a marquee. He wished he was still driving a tractor on his own in a field. But he was wearing a tie for the last time. The marquee was bought, and he was standing on the stage facing a mother and her son who come expecting a miracle. Nan and the singing group had finished their songs and had sat down. The next thing to do was for Pops to preach, because that's what he had seen done in other missions. First some singing, then one or two Christians would give their stories about how they had come to Christ. Then the preacher would preach and then invite people to receive Christ. But this dear mother looked at Pops and Pops looked at her, and before he knew properly what was happening, Pops had got down from the stage and was standing in front of the boy. Nana thought, oh no, what's he going to do now? "Do you want to be healed?" Pops asked the young boy. "Yes," he replied. So Pops held the boy's hands and pulled him out of the wheelchair. The boy stood up and then walked up and down. Because it all took place so quickly, hardly anybody knew what had happened, and the meeting just carried on. including being entertained by a local lad riding his motorbike at the back of the tent. Nana, who was sitting right behind the young boy, couldn't believe it, and Pops couldn't believe it, but there he was, walking. It might have appeared that Pops was full of faith, but the very opposite was true. As Pops had stood on the stage, looking at the boy in his wheelchair, he had felt that the mother would be pushing her son out of the marquee the same way they'd come in, with nothing changed. He had felt no faith at all, only panic to get it over and done with as quickly as possible, and then to advertise, for sale, 300-seater marquee, hardly used. But God is a lot bigger than Pops, and Pops is very glad he is. If our chief scientist, Auntie Rachel, is right, and she usually is, that the universe is still expanding, then Pops reckons it's only because there are still not enough room to express the unsearchable grace and mercies of God.